Welcome to the first of our two-part series, Running for Elective Office in Amherst. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Jessica Ryan, and I will be the moderator for tonight's presentation and discussion. Tonight's focus will be on nominating procedures and campaign issues. We will have an opening presentation by Amherst Town Clerk Sue Audette, followed by a panel discussion with Sarah Barr, Eric Nakajima, and Jim Pistrang. The audience will have an opportunity to ask questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. But if you're watching live on Facebook, you won't be able to ask any questions, but hopefully we'll cover any questions that you might have. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our Zoom maven, Kathy Campbell, who will also be fielding and potentially compiling similar questions coming in from the Q&A to give to us. And also thanks to our partners at Amherst Media for covering these events, which will be live streamed and also available for scheduled viewing on local access cable channel 17. This evening is brought to you from the League of Women Voters Amherst through the tireless work of Joan Rabin, Adrienne Terrizzi, Bonnie Eisman, Janice Ratner, Elaine Berger, Phyllis Lair, Cynthia Brubaker, and Trish Farrington. So thank you all for putting in the women hours to make this informative series possible. In addition to this two-part series, a guidebook is now available on the League of Women Voters Amherst website at lwvamherst.org. The League's overarching mission has always been to encourage informed voters and, most germane to our discussion tonight, active participation in government. The full mission statement of the Amherst League of Women Voters reads, "The League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan political organization, encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy." Our hope is that tonight's discussion will meet you where you are by encouraging you and demystifying the process for those that are considering running, or simply to sow a seed for others who have the "could I run" thought ready to germinate. So let's dive right in with Sue Audette, who's here to break down the nominating procedures for us all. Sue, thank you so much for coming. You can go ahead and turn on your video and the microphone and bring us into this discussion.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. And hello, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. And also thank you for having me. My topic will be the nominating procedure or the process. Basically, how to get started if you decided you want to run for a town office. So just a little background about me. I'm the town clerk of Amherst as of recently, actually, February, but I've been acting town clerk 3 times. And prior to that, I've been in the office as assistant town clerk for a little over 15 years. So I've seen hundreds of candidates, in my time who have run for office. So just to give you a little background, before Town of Amherst had the current form of government, it was a town meeting form of government. And every year, 1/3 of its 240 town meeting members would run for office by taking out nomination papers. So that's 80 pages of nomination papers per election, not including the papers for town-wide seats, which are, the select board at that time, Jones Library, school committee, etc. So as you can see, I've handled a few nomination papers in my time, hundreds. So how do you get started? What's the first thing you should think about? In my opinion is the first requirement that needs to be met in running for elected office is being a registered voter in Amherst. It seems like such a simple, obvious thing, but you would be surprised to hear how many people think that their voter registration has followed them from town to town. So even if you've moved within the town, your voter registration does not get updated. The only way that happens is if you fill out a new voter registration form. So you could call the office ahead of time, anytime you want, to confirm that everything is correct regarding where you're currently registered to vote, or you could wait and check on your voter status when it's time for you to take out your nomination papers. I would recommend being proactive, as it would save time, because when you do come in to take out nomination papers is a process that we have to follow. So having everything set to go before you start that process would be, less time consuming. Let's see. I've got this. I'm not very good at off the cuff, so I've got everything all printed out for me. Let's see here. Okay, so nomination papers, they'll be ready to pull July 1st. It depends on what protocols are in place at that time as far as COVID goes, because we are currently closed to the public, but we're hoping we're going to be open somewhere shortly around that time. So keep an eye out. We'll put information out on the town website as to how this will happen. So it's either going to be in person like it always used to be at our office, or there may be a window set up on the side of town hall where we'll take appointments and meet people. So that's still kind of up in the air, and we'll see as we get further down the line where that is. Let's see. When you do come to pull nomination papers, normally the first thing we do is we check to see that you're a registered voter. If everything is good, then you would indicate what office you're going to be running for, that you're interested in. We would fill out the nomination papers for you based on the office that you're interested in. You would check everything over, and then you would sign it that it is correct. And you're going to also receive a packet of information, which will include a letter from me, which talks about how ballot placement works. It also provides campaign finance forms, guides and tips, gives information on voter lists that you can request, and provides an election calendar, so deadlines to pay attention to, and the MGL, which stands for Mass General Law, protocol regarding conduct on election day as it applies to campaigning within 150 feet of a polling place. So mostly bullet points that you need to be aware of when you are running for office that you really should follow. Okay, let's see. So when you do come to get your nomination papers, please note that Mass General Law states that the clerk's office cannot furnish blank forms for nomination of candidates for any city or town office to any person other than a candidate seeking such nomination or a person presenting the signed authorization of a candidate to secure said forms on his behalf. So I'm quoting MGL Chapter 53, Section 17. So in other words, you can't tell your wife, honey, can you go pick up nomination forms for me, without first providing her an authorization letter stating that for whatever reason you're unable to come between the hours that were open, or whatever the situation may be. So this law really, I think it's worded so that people do this process on their own behalf. I'm not a lawyer, but that to me seems like the reasoning. You know, you are running for office, so you should be taking out papers unless you have a good reason. So once you've gotten your nomination papers, the next step is get signatures. So you can, let's see, so if you're running for the office of a district counselor, and let me just backtrack a little bit here. So the positions that are open for the November election, we have district counselor, which is part of the town council. There are 2 positions per district. We have 5 districts, so that's 10 positions. And the required number of signatures for that position are 25 certified signatures. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Then we have counselor at large, the town council, and there are 3 positions. And this position, this seat requires 50 signatures certified. Then we have 5 seats available for the school committee, 6 seats available for the Jones Library trustees, 3 seats available for the housing authority, and 1 seat available for elector Oliver Smith Will. All of those 4 seats that I just mentioned all require 50 signatures. So every seat that is open this November requires 50 signatures, except for the district counselor, which is 25. Let's see. Let's see. So talking about the district counselor seats again, if you're running for District 1 counselor, that district is precincts 1 and 3. So only voters that are living in those 2 precincts would be able to sign your nomination paper. Okay. Signatures, this is Secretary of State ruling. signatures must be the old-fashioned wet signatures at this point. Think because we're coming out of COVID, it's getting a little easier to make that happen. So the law has changed. We were able, when COVID first started, to accept an electronic signature on petition and nomination papers for state offices, but that has changed over now. So back to the old-fashioned wet signature. But you can ask others to circulate nomination papers for signatures on your behalf. You can get creative in collecting the signatures. So you could mail them to voters' households asking for a wet signature and include maybe a self-addressed stamped envelope to return them back to you is one thought. Standing out in front of local places, CVS, library, post office, where you would find a lot of people that are possibly Amherst registered voters would be another. So just some suggestions. So after you've collected your signatures, and we advise you get at least another, well, I'm going to get into that too, but you should get more than you need, because some of them are not going to pan out. Again, some of these signatures may be of people who thought their voter registration followed them, and it didn't, and they never re-registered when they moved into town. So you want to get, up to you, 10% more, 15% more, 20% more, whatever you feel comfortable with. But so you've gotten all your signatures, and then you would return your nomination papers back to the town clerk's office to be certified. The earlier return them, the better, because this gives us sufficient time to contact you in case you need to gather more signatures if you're falling short. So don't run in at 4:55 when the deadline is 5 o'clock on that day, because if you don't have enough signatures, you're going to be out of luck. So the deadline will be September 14th by 5 p.m. and again at the town clerk's office. And let's see. So again, some of the reasons a signature may not certify, the person's not registered at all, or maybe they listed a post office box as their residential address. Can't live in a post office box. They don't live in Amherst, or maybe their signature is illegible. Maybe they're the only ones registered at that address and we cannot read the signature. So, or they could have already signed another nomination paper on your behalf. So that would be a duplicate signature, which we would not be able to verify. Okay, so it's acceptable to have the voter print their name after their signature for clarification when you're gathering signatures. So you can mention that to whoever you give your forms to if you go that route. That is perfectly fine. So nothing against that. So let's say you've gotten your signatures, and for some reason you decide that you don't want to run. And you've already submitted your signatures to our office. If you do decide for whatever reason you can't run, you don't want to run, you have to withdraw by 5 p.m. on September 30th. And in order to withdraw, you have to submit a notarized letter to our office. Okay, so 5 p.m. on September 30th for withdrawal deadline. So I've been asked whether it's possible to run for counselor at large and district counselor at the same time. And the thinking behind this is that it would increase your chance to be elected. So while it's possible to run for both offices, state law prohibits a person's name from appearing on the ballot more than once for the same office. So if a candidate returns papers for both offices, they must withdraw from nomination from one of these offices, and again, by the last day to withdraw, in order for the name to appear on the ballot for the seat that they did not withdraw from. Failure to withdraw or failure for the withdrawal to be notarized will result in the candidate's name not appearing on the ballot for either position. So this is important. So if somebody does decide to try to do this, you have to also be aware that you've got to withdraw from one of those seats before the deadline. State law does not restrict a person from taking out nomination papers for multiple offices, however. So if you wanted to run for the school committee and the town council, that's perfectly acceptable. So once the nomination paper deadline has passed, What happens next is that names will be drawn for placement on the ballot per Charter Section 7.1, and this will happen on Friday, October 1st at a time to be determined by the town clerk, probably about 9 o'clock in the morning. Names appear on the ballot as registered to vote. So if you use a nickname that most people know you by and not your actual registered name your name as registered to vote, and you're worried that people won't recognize your legal name on the ballot, then you may want to make this either part of your campaigning materials, or you could re-register to vote under your nickname. But I kind of advise against that because your voter registration is a legal document. So if you were to ever, if say you did not change back to your legal name and you left it under a nickname, if you ever needed to do anything that required a voter registration for some kind of legal documentation, and now that does not match up with your birth certificate, let's say, you could have some kind of a problem. So I'm not advocating either way, but I just want to make you aware that it might be better just to get it out, say, okay, yeah, I know you know me as Chip, but my real name is Charles, that kind of thing. So for those who are running for re-election, MGL states that to the name of each candidate for a town office who is an elected incumbent, the words candidate for re-election shall be added to the ballot. So be aware if you are running that you will see that next to your name. And then as a political committee or candidate for office, you are entitled to one free voter list in accordance with MGL Chapter 51, Section 55, either in print or electronically. Another one of my recommendations is to get it electronically. Number one, you're saving a lot of paper, but number two, you can sort the records, you can do all kinds of things. You can, depending on the program you use, you could maybe query certain districts. It depends on how you want to target your data. So you can share it, all kinds of things. So the voter list would be as of the date requested. So something to think about is waiting until the deadline to register to vote has passed, because then you would get the most up-to-date voter list. And the deadline to register to vote currently it's now 20 days, again, before the election. It was 10. We've been having a lot of special election law passing back and forth and changing. So it would be October 13th by 8 p.m. That's the deadline to register to vote in person. Online, it's usually 11:59 p.m. on the same day, October 13th. Let's see, other types of files that may also be requested, such as, say, you want to know who voted in the last town election or in the last couple town elections. There would be no charge if you received it electronically, but this is not part of your freebie. If you, especially if you wanted it in print, we would have to charge, and we would have to figure out how many pages, all of that. So, always ask our office. We're happy to talk to you about this, and we can just work with you on what you'd like to do. And let's see, so the next League of Women Voters Forum on April 15th, Jason Tate of the Massachusetts Office of Campaign and Political Finance will be talking about all things finance. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, except to say that as a candidate whose name is appearing on a town ballot, you are required to file 2 campaign finance reports in compliance with Chapter 55 of the MGL. And they are the 8th day preceding the election, which is due October 25th, and the end of year report, which is due January 20th, 2022. And that does not include if you have a statement of organization, which also gets filed. We will give you these forms, or we can show you where to find them online, so you don't have to worry about that part of it. And it's worth mentioning that if you have somehow missed the deadline to take out and return nomination papers, that you may choose to run a write-in campaign. You'd want to get word out as broadly as you could so that people know that you are interested in a particular seat. And you can even hand out pre-printed stickers with your name and address to voters. But beware, big beware. Stickers can cause, if they're not the best quality out there, or they're getting old and they're not sticking anymore or whatever, they can cause trouble in our tabulators. They get unstuck from the ballot and the tabulators jam. So if you decide to do it this way, get the best stickers possible that you can buy. Okay, or you can even just hand out a sheet of paper and people can use that and write your name on the ballot. Lots of different ways. But of course, everybody's going to be good and you're going to take out papers on time. Okay. All right. So our town charter allows for publication of candidate statements under section 7.6, and it reads, the town council shall establish a process compliant with state campaign and political finance laws for candidates whose names will appear on the election ballot to publish statements regarding their candidacy on the town bulletin board. So this is a great opportunity to get your positions out there to voters and make yourself heard. So that's all I have basically for how to get yourself on the ballot.
That's great, Sue.
Yeah.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I just want to take a second to remind the audience that if they have questions for Sue or any panelist at any time, they can add them to the Q&A. But we're going to get to the Q&A after we introduce our other panelists, which they can go ahead and turn their videos and cameras on now. We've asked them all to take about 2 minutes each to introduce themselves and to give us an idea of what experience they have that brings them to this panel. So Eric, let's begin with you, and then Sarah, followed by Jim. So take it away.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. This has been a really challenging year, so I hope everyone out there is healthy and happy and well. I'm Eric Nakashima. I grew up in the town of Amherst and went to UMass, and I am currently the Director of Government Relations for the Massachusetts Teachers Association, which is relevant because we actually do a lot of campaign and election work. So I'm continuing to sort of do this stuff related to supporting candidates to support education. And I've also had the dubious honor of running for office, I think 5 elections in the span of 4 years for a combination of offices. Won a few of them, lost a few of them, but had a lot of fun doing it. So I think I do have some good experience from the success side as well as the learning what not to do side. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, everyone.
So I think I'm next. My name is Sarah Barr, and I'm on this panel because I have run campaigns, but I also have to admit that I ran for office in Amherst and lost. So I was one of those people that Sue mentioned who ran for town meeting back in the day. And I had just moved to Amherst and I loved Amherst so much and wanted to get involved. And so I took out those nomination papers and I got my signature. But what I didn't realize is that you actually have to talk to people if you want to be elected. And so I was in a competitive ward and I lost by a couple of votes. But it is so important and exciting to be involved in your community. So even if you decide that running for office or working on someone's campaign isn't the thing for you, I would definitely encourage you to get involved in the town or your local community if you don't live in Amherst. I ran Mindy Dom's state rep race. I ran a school committee members race in Northampton, and I'm working on a mayoral campaign right now. So I love the organizing of campaigns and thinking about, the process of so the steps you can take to get your candidates' information out there and the steps to win. So really excited to be here with everyone tonight and really excited that there are people that want to run for office.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jim Pistrang. I've been an Amherst resident for 32 years now, raised 2 kids here through the school system. I was a town meeting member for 19 years, and then I was the town moderator for 6 years following that. And then I ran an unsuccessful campaign to be on the town council. So my what I have to offer here, you have to weight that based on the fact that I actually didn't win. But I did, running for a town meeting did involve talking to people in my precinct. But it was, not at all a hardship. There were 10 precincts, so it's not that many people. Town moderator was a townwide election, but the advantage there is nobody in their right mind ever wanted to run for it. So I always ran unopposed. So really running for town council in 2018 was my first experience running in a competitive townwide election.
Okay, so I'm gonna just open up with a couple of basic questions. And the first one, and anyone can chime in, I'd love to hear from all of you. Once you decided to run for office, how did you get started? What should a candidate new to campaigning do first?
I'll go first if you want there. So my first step was to recruit a campaign committee, a group of people to help me with the process. And I had a pool of people who had been urging me to run, so I made all of them, put up or shut up and work with me. The most critical positions was finding someone willing to be my campaign manager, but even more important, I think, was finding someone willing to be my treasurer. And I was fortunate enough to get somebody who had experience as a campaign treasurer for another campaign. So came into it understanding and knowing all the things that needed to be done. And there's all the legal requirements that Sue talked about. There's also things like setting up a PayPal account and a bank account and things like that, all of which my treasurer did for me. So I was fortunate to have that. For me, it was really important that my campaign committee was people that I got along with personally, but who had different views from me and from each other, and people who were willing to challenge me and challenge my views. And I ended up with a great group of people. So that was, whether or not I won or lost, the experience of running, the experience of working with that group of people was a very positive one. So I would urge people to find people that both that they trust, but who will challenge them to be on their campaign committee.
And Eric or Sarah? I can repeat the question if you.
No, I have the question. I would say a couple things. I think Jim actually did a nice job of laying it out. Hopefully you have some friends or people that you've been engaged in activities who you can reach out to and start building. I remember you asked a question about like having a committee or not. To me, there's a committee that you have to have for sort of legal compliance reasons, for OCPF compliance or town municipal compliance, which is important, but there's also just simply having a kitchen cabinet or a group of people who can start doing outreach, link up to their friends, identify groups to reach out to or individuals to reach out to, starting getting yourself organized. And I think that's really critical. I do think getting the legal compliance issues straightened out early on is incredibly important, because there's a lot of things you need to do, but there's also a lot of things you can get wrong. And so it's good to get on the right side of that. And then, two other things I'd say is one, think about why you're running. And especially I would say the closer you are, to, like, certainly when I ran for school committee, there are issues that are going to come up that if you're paying attention to issues in town, you're going to know some of them already. There are others that are going to be new to you. Just start thinking and getting comfortable with why you're running and how you'd explain that to people. Think about town issues. And then the only other thing I'd say in general is, if you're able to, this thing can feel stressful, but relax and have a good time with it. It can be a lot of fun.
And I would just add, many hands make light work. And so I think that, sort of what Jim and Eric alluded to is, having others around, whether it's to bounce ideas off of them or to share the load or to, deal with the office of campaign finance. Like, there's just having a group of people that can do this with you really makes it, I think, more fun and also easier. And I want to just build on something that Jim said about people who have different perspectives. I think having a diverse group of people who can help you through this process is also critical. You might know a lot about education, but you might not know a lot about affordable housing or environmental issues. You may or may not have kids that are in the schools. And so I think when you can bring together people with different perspectives and different experiences, you really can build a stronger campaign.
And maybe some of you might have touched on this, but what did you find were the most challenging aspects of running for elective office? And maybe in hindsight, what might you do differently? Or did you find that you, after the first time, did something on purpose very differently than you had the first?
This is a bit of a silly answer, but it's grueling. So stay hydrated and pack snacks. As funny as it sounds, thinking about the campaigns that I've been a part of, whether you're door knocking or you're, out at the farmer's market or you're attending house parties, it is a lot of work. And so, just take care of yourself along the way. Try to pace yourself, and again, many hands make light work.
I know one of the questions that you've had and some things that were put together was, what if you're new to town politics, you haven't run for office, you don't feel like you know a lot of people. But let's assume for sake of argument, the question I asked a moment ago of, why are you running? You have a personally really well felt answer that you feel deeply committed to for some reason or another. I would say that, when I first ran for office a long time ago, the question of like who's with you and who's not, and they tend to do things like people ask you about the select board members and the prominent. I'm dating myself. This is a few years ago. People in town meeting or something like that, and what I started thinking about is like if you get hung up on that stuff and you get hung up or insecure on that stuff, what it prevents you from doing is organizing and going out and meeting new people and door knocking and making new connections. So your personal network may be very robust or it may feel limited to you. But the reality is, if you look at the entirety of the town, no matter how many people you know, and some people know a lot of folks, but you know more after running, I'll tell you that much. But no matter how many people you've met or know, the reality is there's still going to be a huge number of people that you've never met before and that you don't know, some of whom are very engaged in town issues, some of whom aren't, but most of whom are actually really interested in meeting you, interested in hearing what you have to say. And so my biggest advice would be, don't listen to all that background noise. I mean, make phone calls, you should, get support you can, but also have fun getting out there and knocking on doors and meeting people, and also get over that thing. The worst thing in the world to do is to knock on a door of a stranger if you've never done it before. And the greatest pleasure in the world is talking to someone you've never met before once you do knock on that door. And it really is, it's a huge barrier. But then once you do that, you get into what Sarah talked about. It's hugely grueling and you need to hydrate and you need snacks.
So I made a list in preparation of this question of what I felt were the challenges of my campaign. Big one, reaching people that didn't know me and were undecided. And it's, as Eric said, I was running for a town-wide office, and it's a lot of people out there, and reaching them is a challenge. A willingness to express unpopular views, to stay honest to yourself. And it's really tempting when you're speaking to a group and you know what their opinion is, it's really tempting to kind of edge a little bit towards what they're thinking. And it's really important not to do that. A willingness to brag a little bit and not be humble, not, even if I'm thinking I could never be a good counselor, you don't want to say that to other people. You want to really feel positive about yourself, and it's okay to say positive things about yourself. It's a challenge asking people for things. It's hard to ask people for signatures. It's hard to ask people for help. It's hard to ask people for money. The time commitment was a huge challenge. In addition to just getting out there and talking to people, a lot of time I spent writing, because I really wanted to carefully express my opinions on things in writing, and you get all these different requests from different groups to state your positions on things. And it was very time consuming. You get questionnaires, you have to prepare for forums. And a challenge, my last challenge that I wrote down here, I don't know how much I want to talk about it tonight, but I was running against a slate of candidates that were built by an organized political action committee. And I didn't want to be represented by a committee like that. I chose not to be endorsed by them. And it was a huge challenge to break through that. And I didn't break through that. And it's a challenge, and it's a decision people have to make. I'd say bottom line is be true to yourself with whatever you decide to do.
Well, this is great because that leads into actually our first audience question, which there's two that are slightly related. So I'm just going to read them both together and you can address them as you wish. Are there implications or consequences if a candidate accepts donations from a political action committee versus being independent? That is, is there an obligation to continue to pursue the goals of the PAC once you're elected? And so relatedly, as a district counselor, what is the obligation to represent the views of the people in your district? So you can talk about that aspect.
I'll be brave and go first. I'll start with the second question, the obligation to represent the views of the people in your district. So as I said, I was a town meeting member for 19 years. And on the one hand, I always tried to gauge what the people in my precinct were feeling about things, but I still voted the way my conscience told me to vote. And I made it clear when I was running that that's what I was going to do. So if there were questions about, big financial questions about school overrides or things like that, I had my own position and my own feelings and reasons for why I wanted to vote the way I did. I made it clear to my constituents what those were. I never tried to hide it. But if, way back in the 90s when we were voting on the override for the high school renovation, if a majority of my precinct had said vote no, I still would have voted yes. As far as the obligations of accepting donations, first of all, the PAC in Amherst didn't make financial donations to people, but they did make in-kind donations, such as help building web pages, and most important, putting your name on the literature that went out. No, there's absolutely no legal obligation to follow anybody else's strictures or rules about how you should vote on things. So if you feel comfortable being endorsed by a group, by all means be endorsed by that group, and it doesn't mean you have to vote the way the group wants you to vote. I had my own sort of personal philosophy of feeling that a PAC was a bad idea for the town, and that's why I chose not to be endorsed by them. They might not have endorsed me anyway, I don't know, but before they offered, I told them I wasn't interested. So I'll never know the answer to that. But no, there's no obligation to pursue the goals of a PAC that supports you.
So I'm going to come at this at a slightly different angle on that question. My assumption is if it's hard to be sort of like atmospheric about this because we're probably not talking about like, the NRA and the Sierra Club. We're talking about like PACs in Amherst. That, ultimately, certainly in Amherst, there are people and issues and points of view that sit behind the PAC and that organize the PAC. And so, to my mind, if you're going to accept support from a PAC, and I'm pretty sure I was deemed actually as a candidate that was supported by one, that's because you feel comfortable with the views and you're an affinity to the views that are being expressed. And it may not be on everything, but it may be on a lot of things. I find as a side point, as somebody who grew up in town and like has a bit of a towny element to me, but also I'm a professional planner who has done like development and economic development work. I tend to see a lot of views in town from multiple angles simultaneously in a sympathetic way, but it doesn't mean I don't come down on a position, and ultimately have a view. My point on this is, first off, is that I feel like if we talk about PACs, we're sort of talking about something like it's this big thing, when ultimately what we're really talking about is a collection of people underneath it who you get a chance to meet, you can talk to, you can say I have an affinity. And then if you're voting, you're not voting because you're feeling like you're beholden to a group. Ideally, if you're getting support from some group, it's because you actually have an affinity or perspective that allows you to, that is consistent or consonant. But if it isn't, you just hopefully explain to people why you're doing what you're doing in an open way. And that's the great thing about elections is people can love you one election and not the next if they don't want to. That's, it's free that way. It's okay.
Oh yeah, just two things. It was interesting to hear, Jim, you talk about your writing. I think one of the important things that you can do is be in conversation with your constituents. And so they're going to know what your position is at any point, because whether you're sending out an e-newsletter or the district councilors have meetings in Amherst, like there are ways to interact with people all the time. So once you're elected, it's not like it's done. It's like, you need to be in ongoing communication with your community. And there are going to be issues that come to town that are going to be surprises and new, and just how you engage with your voters is important. If you're trying to like bait and switch, like, okay, I'm going to support these things, but surprise, I'm in office and I'm going to do what I want, it's not going to get you reelected. But I also think that there's important trust that can build between voters and elected officials. And part of that is through transparency and conversation and movement together. I'm interested that there's talk about the PAC in Amherst. And I did community organizing when I was younger, sort of in a different time and different place. And for organizing, people look to organize people to make social change happen. And so it's not just the PAC, but it could be your church is an organized group of people that might all get together and say, we like and respect you. So everybody from, Grace or Emmanuel or, from the JCA could be supporters. There's lots of different ways, or like your kid's soccer team or your bowling league or whomever, thinking about elections from groups is actually, I think, a really helpful way to organize, because people can tell their friends, you can bring in different perspectives. So I would just caution us against sort of thinking that there's only one way to think about groups and how groups influence elections.
And the next question is, I've heard that certain tactics that are widely used are almost totally ineffective, i.e. lawn signs. What has been your experience? How do you measure the impact of signs, buttons, debate performances, etc.? Well, debate performances seems different in kind, but what are your thoughts on that?
So I went to campaign manager school in order to figure out how to do this because this was my first time. And the trainer was like, lawn signs do not win elections. And everyone in the class was like, what do you mean they're so important? We have to get lawn signs. And the trainer was like, no, voters win elections. And so you really need to figure out, how are you doing that individual work, getting people who you're going to be able to turn out on the polls. And so certainly those things can influence, but lawn signs, which has come up in the chat a couple of times, are not effective.
Do we have a concurrence?
On the lawn signs, as people like to say, lawn signs don't vote. So organizing is much more important, as Sarah's saying. I do think that, I know just from conversations in town about multiple campaigns, if you have a couple of candidates who have a lot of lawn signs on the other hand, and others that have like none out, eventually there's going to be an underlying buzz. But the underlying buzz, I think, goes back to what Sarah said, is the question is a candidate viable? Are they running a strong campaign? And that's not going to be about lawn signs. That's going to be about organizing and support and other elements. So, if everyone else has lawn signs out, you're probably going to end up getting lawn signs out too. But and the nature of the race matters too. I mean, something we didn't talk about, but for the school committee, if I'm not wrong, it's the top 5 candidates get elected to school committee in terms of vote getters, I think. And so, if depending on how many people are running, part of what you're doing is you're trying to understand if there are 5 people who get elected and there are 7 candidates, it'd be great to be number 1, but to be honest with you, what you're really trying to avoid being is number 6. Just as a thought.
Okay, this one might be for Sue. Is it possible that we're going to have a primary for certain offices in Amherst this fall?
Yeah, that is for me. No, I think maybe what they mean by primary is preliminary. The charter, the way it was worded was in the very beginning when we were just moving into the new form of government, we did have a preliminary election before the actual town election, but that has passed. That was a one-time only thing. So we're going right into the biennial town election in November.
Okay, and I do want to make sure we get to this one. I'm a 15-year-old who's deeply concerned with town politics. How can I get involved? Are there any positions open to people my age? Can I be on a candidate's committee?
I'll go for that one first. Hi, I'm Rita. She's somebody I know a little bit. So a couple different options. First of all, there are a ton of volunteer committees in town that will accept high school students and do accept high school students on them. And you can call town hall and talk to Angela Mills, what's Angela's official job title? Sue?
She's, yeah, I put my mute back on or off. She's the assistant to the town manager.
So call Angela, tell her you're interested in volunteering in the town, and she'll look out for you. As far as getting on a candidates committee, I'd say pick the candidate you like the most, call them up and say, hey, I'm here to volunteer. And if anybody had done that to me when I was running, they would have been put to work right away. So that's two different ways you can get involved.
Student member, by the way, of the school committee, just as a point, it's like an ex officio seat, non-voting, but you can actually be on the school committee, which is kind of a cool thing to do.
Do you think that there are particular talents needed by an individual wanting to push back on a majority view, such as PAC supported counselors? Is there some particular personality trait that you think would be most helpful?
I think Jim made a good point earlier that you really have to be true to your views and that matters, and people are going to pay attention to that. So I think whatever, again, pushing back against the PAC or majority views, I think the clearer you are about what motivates you and what matters, the more convincing you will be as you interact with people. Because again, running campaigns involves meeting lots of people and talking with them. And so you need to have your message clear. You need to be willing to listen to others and answer questions and just be clear about what you care about.
I think that's great advice. And I think it's great advice whether, like the framing of the question was, if you're like, fighting City Hall or something, what's a good character trait to have or talent to have? And I would say the reality is, regardless of what position you're on that, if you are in fact someone who has a good understanding about who you are and why you're running, is organized, is a good listener. I think that's something, by the way, that Sarah just said, I'd reiterate. We think a lot about candidates as people who get a rap down and know how to talk about something. But the reality is one of the most powerful things you need to do as a candidate is listen and create a space where you're really absorbing and like genuinely taking in, which it can be hard. If you have to knock hundreds of doors, it can actually be really hard to create a space of like silence and stillness in yourself where you're actually listening to someone and not just putting them in a box, but saying there might be something unique about what they're saying that you can learn. And there always is. There always is. On the other hand, though, I'm going to say this again, because I said it earlier, if you get into it and you do it, there's so much joy in running for office and meeting people and talking to them and listening to them. And that joy, by the way, if you can do that, that would help you whether you're fighting City Hall or fighting, I don't know, for City Hall, whatever the proper phrase is.
Well, that kind of leads into this next question. The person asks, could you speak to finding the balance between knowing the issues inside and out versus being willing to learn, change, and grow? I suppose this is also getting to the strength of your own opinions and balancing those with listening to and representing the community as well. But where do you find that balance, or is one slightly edge out the other?
I'll go for that one first. Hi, Anna. Nice to see you on here. So yeah, it's a balance for sure. In terms of knowing the issues, no one can possibly know every issue inside out totally, unless you're living and breathing, unless you're, on the select board or on the school committee and going to meetings twice a month or every week or whatever. You're not going to know everything. It's really important to say you don't know when you don't know. That's one really important thing. But listening is huge. Listening is really, really important. So for me, the balance was when I did have an opinion on something, I would state my opinion, but I would also really try and take the time to listen to people. One of the best things we did in my campaign, the thing that I liked the most, is we organized house parties where we got people to volunteer to call, let's say 15 or 20 of their friends, and I'd have that group to speak to and answer questions. And I'd usually have, a 5-minute thing where I talked, and then it was all just a discussion, questions and answers. And it was fantastic. And it was that challenge of the balance of wanting to state my opinion and feeling it's important that people know what I'm thinking, but also really taking the time to take a breath and listen to other people.
I would encourage curiosity. I love going to town meetings, and I realize that there is just so much that you have to learn because town councilors are talking about everything from budgets to policies. There's just a lot to learn. And so this might actually go back to, the question about like, how do you stand up to a town hall? I think being curious, because you can't know everything. And so if you can take a curious stance, like you'll learn and grow, and I think be able to influence the community in a way that feels good and is positive.
I'm going to add something funny to this, that if you're running for office and you don't have an opinion, a developed opinion about, I don't know, a new elementary school building, new DPW facility, what, the vote just happened at the Jones, you're going to find that I'm making a joke about this. I'm trying to be light about this, but there's some issues that come up in town that you kind of are aware of, that if you go meet people and you don't have some kind of approach or opinion on it, then you're going to probably lose credibility pretty quickly, because it's like, these are the central issues our town's dealing with. And it's like, my God, you've never thought about this? It's like, you got to have some opinion, right? I mean, but honestly, once you get past that, and even when you're thinking about that, what would you want to know next, right? So we talk about the library, but then we talk about wanting to make the library better, right? So you'd really want to dig in. I mean, my point is, it's easy, and I think there are comments in the Q&A and stuff about, how polarized a town can be. Breaking that down, and certainly when I was on school committee, I felt this was true. Breaking that down started by having conversations that were very authentic and very grounded in respecting people and listening to them. And that you can't do that if you're not listening. You can't, actually, what I said a moment ago, you can't do it if you have your issue papers and you're slotting somebody in. And you can't do it if you're talking all the time. And so you got to open up spaces for authentic engagement. And if you do that, you'll find your positions grow and you'll learn a lot of things. But you'll be engaged in something really great.
I think we have another one for Sue. It seems like a technical question. Must candidates for district councilors have committee members and contributors who live in that district only?
Committee members, I'm just reading it and thinking about it. I don't know. How's that, Jim? I don't know. I don't think so. I know you need for signatures on your nomination paper, yes, because those are you're running for that district and you want the voters to be voting for you from that district. But committee members and contributors, I don't know. That would be something for campaign finance. Yeah.
I think legally the answer is no. You can have your campaign committee isn't it's a legal entity in that you have a treasurer who has certain responsibilities, but I don't think there's any requirement for where they live. I think if you want a 14-year-old to be your treasurer who's not a registered voter, it's probably okay for them to fill out forms. Maybe not that, I don't know. But it's more a political choice in a lot of ways. If I'm running in District 2, do I want to have a group of people who live in District 4 advising me on my strategy and my positions on things? It makes more sense to have people who are in your district. Or if I'm running townwide, it really wouldn't make sense for me to have people helping me in my campaign who don't live in Amherst.
Thank you, Jim.
And you should ask everyone you know for money. I mean, this is one of the things that we haven't talked about. We sort of alluded to it with the lawn sign things, but lawn signs are not cheap. And so like, talk to your preschool teacher, talk to your next door neighbor, invite people to contribute to your campaign, because if you do mailings or stickers or buttons, I mean, you don't need a ton of money, but it's a way for people to get involved and support you as a candidate. So, I think we've talked about, being courageous and asking people for help. Also don't be afraid to ask people for money. It's not dirty, it's not bad or anything like that. It's just, it's part of how this works, and small amounts of money can really help with the little things like, a mailing, or those stickers or whatever. And
then, because we're running out of time, but there's two questions I'd love to get in. if you could answer quickly, what factors should you consider whether to run for a district versus at large? Does anyone have a little bit of advice?
Running town-wide is a greater effort than running in a single district. I mean, they're both really intense, but one is literally essentially, an overgrown neighborhood, and the other one is the entire town. Another fact, so one would be, have you run before? I mean, are you engaged? How big is your network in town? I mean, the reason I'm saying this is that oftentimes the people who are going to run for town-wide office are people who may already have some kind of political base and have some experience and have some sort of network. And the reality is you're going to be competing against them. And in other words, I guess what I'd say is that the things that come up in my mind, probably Sarah can answer better, because they're actually very nuts and bolts campaign, electoral, sort of vote counting operations. How are you going to meet people? Who's going to volunteer for you stuff? Than it is philosophical. Philosophically, I mean, they're the same job, right?
That's great. Okay, so I think we'll wrap it up by asking this final question. If someone was hesitant to run because they're not a politician, what would you say to encourage them? And Sue, you can chime in too.
I guess I'd say that in local politics, nobody's a politician and everybody's a politician. If you feel passionately about your community and you're willing to put in the time and effort, then you should run. There was an earlier question, was how much did it feel like dirty politics running? And it really didn't. Everybody in town really behaves themselves admirably, and there wasn't negative campaigning, particularly, at least nothing that I was aware of. So if you've got the passion to do it, you should do it, and don't worry about whether you feel like a politician or not.
I think public service is one of the greatest, most enjoyable and noblest things you can do for any number of reasons that bring you to that avocation. And some of the often, like including in Amherst, everyone I know in Amherst who's involved in elected office, I really like, and I've only treasured getting to know them better. And that's true often frequently in the State House and statewide too. I'm saying that only because, demystify it. You're a person, they're a person. You're interested and curious about running. It's okay, and it's also okay if you lose your first race and then you run again or something. You know what I mean? Just just enjoy the process and embrace it. It's okay. The water is fine.
And I hope everyone who's on this call takes away the message that I think we've all said, is that public service is important, as Eric mentioned. And as Jim mentioned, there's lots of ways to get involved in the community. So please, whether you decide to run for elected office or you say, this isn't my moment, volunteer, get involved. There are just so many ways that you can contribute to the community. And I totally agree that public service is the way to go.
Well, I'm come right to time, so unfortunately I'm going to have to draw a close, but I want to thank you all. It has been really wonderful, very informative, and really actually inspiring. I hope that people will take from it to get involved. Now, there's a second part to our series, which will be on campaign finance regulations and reporting, and that's going to be on Thursday, April 15th from 7 to 8 with Jason Tate of the Massachusetts Office of Campaign and Political Finance, with panelists Marianne Grimm and Bonnie McCracken, and that'll be moderated by Phyllis Lair. So please register for that event if you haven't already at lwvamherst.org, and we will see you then. Thank you again for all of the participants and the panelists. Thank you so much.